I have seen many films. Too many films. I'm a film buff. But one film above them all stands out in my memory. And for the longest time, over the 17 years that passed since I originally saw it, I pondered why. What's different about this film? I learned it was at the crossroads of where the many unique, bizarre elements of its creation came together. You had the ridiculousness and charm of 80s action movies, which at the time, caught up in the kairotic moment, lent it a sort of bizarre fearlessness in which it evokes the imaginative, like playing along quality, where it takes itself so seriously that you get into it. It's something you never even consider as reality because it's so ludicrous, and yet it does because you can't help it because it's so foreign to you. Probably like going to a drag show or something if you're a virgin to that or some nonsense. And then you had the fact that it came from a genre where the previous two films had already done something that had never been done before in cinema, that were so hardcore they had nothing left to prove. Setting the genre for stunts and exploitation, like the bar. They set the bar for that for all time, and it still hasn't really quite been surpassed. And then you had the fact that that those are two things: the hardcore edge, and then the 80s action time period, which can't be repeated. And then the third thing is the story setting, it being in a very niche genre that's post-apocalyptic sci-fi, and that, when society's being recreated and there's no rules, and it's like an escapist fantasy in that you can believe anything because it's impossible to predict how culture could evolve if you're jumping to a point in the future without any too much explanation, and we don't know exactly when it is in the future. So you have this very niche genre where basically anything goes. And that's another layer that's highly unique. So all these layers are perfectly balanced and combined together like three different lenses that you're looking through, and then you get this bizarre, fucking insane, original thing that you can't really, not buy, but you can't really believe either. And so it's so weird that it has this overall mesmerizing quality. But there's a fourth lens. And the fourth lens is Australia. This was an Australian movie, and Australia is a fucking weird place with a fucking weird culture that you're going to have culture shock just by watching this movie if you're not familiar with it. So yes, it's Mad Max 3 Beyond Thunderdome. Alright, so let me talk about this movie. I loved the first two Mad Max films much more than this as a kid. But as an adult, surprisingly, the more that time passes, in the 17 years or so since I first saw The Road Warrior, and it just blew my mind, and I thought, in 17 years have passed, this one is actually, I almost like it more, because it has, let me try to explain. First of all, you have to understand my love of The Road Warrior. I thought, wow, first of all, I never thought there could be a more badass hero than Indiana Jones, but a hero that Max makes Indiana Jones look vanilla and safe. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, I feel like this is the difference between elementary school and high school. And I just so happened to be starting high school when I discovered these films. And so I thought, wait a minute. To me, the concept of a post-apocalyptic world that reveals the beast and the evil within men, the capacity for sadism and depravity, that the movie just has an overall explorative quality into that, evoking the imagination, and then the concept of anti-hero being new to my, previously relatively sheltered religious fundamentalist background, ultra-conservative Christian family background, and then seeing The Road Warrior was like a shock to my whole system, and I thought, wow, what have I been missing all my life? I didn't know that such a thing could be an art piece could be so powerful, mesmerizing, engaging, adrenaline-fueled, or my teen hormones at the time, and it all seemed to have a very non-romantic or look at all of these heavy intense subjects. And then the symbolic parallelism of seeing modern technologies and vehicles used for medieval barbarian violence and evil. The list goes on. But the first two films established that world and established that character, and had already done such amazing things and had won so much, fame and glory, that it felt like with the third film they were just doing it for themselves in a way. Of course, trying to make money because it's a big Hollywood movie, but at this point they thought, well, I'm trying to imagine myself where George Miller and his team were trying to think like, well, what do we do next? Well, they thought, let's make it fun and let's make it ridiculous, and let's just play and play around. And that's what it feels like. It feels like it has a lighter tone. And at first, as a kid, I thought, I hate this. This isn't Mad Max. I want this to be what the Road Warrior is to Mad Max. The Road Warrior is like a look into hell. It's like an absolute look into the thing you don't want to see. And then there's a character, Max, who has to confront that. The worst in people. And the absolute worst that you never see in the movies. Like, this is a true R-rated, borderline X-rated film. And you're like, all right, this is a new level of immersiveness for me, immersion in movies, because, but this film is like, this film had the feeling of there's nothing left to prove, because we've already proved it, so now what do we do? Well, just kind of fuck around and have fun and do something bizarre and make the character a little bit more human, because we went a little too far with the first two films, and the character was kind of soulless, and it truly is a depressing first two movies. And so then this crazy, like, the first time I saw this movie, it's like alcohol. You're like, oh, this tastes terrible. And then over time, you become an alcoholic, and that's what I feel about this movie. This movie, the music, the performances, just the nuance, script is like, the accents lend to further quality where just like scenes and dialogue stick out in your mind, and it's just burned into your memory for being so fucking weird. But because of that, it's so mesmerizing, and it's so enjoyable, and it's so visually iconic, and the ridiculousness of it all that you can't help but contemplate. And somehow if you slow down and try to analyze or isolate a given event or scene or name or happening at any point in this movie, it shouldn't make any sense, like a fever dream, and it shouldn't be taken seriously. And yet it's so original that altogether, this world, you can't help but be transported to another reality. And it's a reality that, for all we know, it might be feasible. It might be a romanticized version of Australia, but I don't fucking know anything about Australia, and I've never been there, so for all I know, this is what Australia is actually like. And so basically it's one of those things where it really challenged me at the time, and I couldn't process it, but in hindsight it got better and better, and I became a fanatic about this movie. This movie is more memorable and unique to me than any other movie I've ever seen. I don't know if it's my favorite movie of all time. I think this and The Road Warrior are tied for my two favorite films of all time, because my opinion changes as time goes on. And then I have like top 100 tier list of movies that are all competitive. But it's weird when it comes to these two movies. There's really no argument. The first Mad Max would be on there. It's just too simplistic in one note. So I feel like it doesn't compare to these two masterpieces. And I feel like liking this movie more defines me more as a person. Like, if I were to make movies, this is the gold standard I'd be always trying to look up to and live up to. But I feel like there's too much of a chaotic moment, meaning the hype of the time and so many things. It's kind of like The Empire Strikes Back, and it's just the perfect storm of perfect creative collaborations and conditions that allowed for such an original experience that can't really be replicated. But I don't really want to believe that. I want to believe that more movies as bizarre and mesmerizing and memorable and entertaining and fearless and fun can exist like this, that are just so many things. Like, there's scenes in this movie that are unintentionally hilarious, and there's scenes in this movie that are downright awful and terrible, very like grotesque, and things that occur in content and the overall content. So and then it's oddly spiritual in a way for being so deliberately simplistic, that I mean, the timeless hero story of saving a tribe of basically surviving children and how they recreate reality. It's a truly timeless, like fantastorical in a sense of a side of humanity that's very, and yet it's also bleak and sad. But the spirit of the movie feels meaningful and fun because of the more heroic story. So this has more heart than the first two films. It has more meaning, but it's also so fucking goofy. It's so goofy and so ludicrous that that's actually the thing that's more memorable to me in time. And it's just, I think it's so different than it's the most original movie I've ever seen. It's so different than anything I've seen. How it takes itself so seriously, and when you try to think about it, it's not. But while it's playing, while you're watching it, you're still getting into it. It's just, I've never been able to find anything like this film. And the soundtrack is by Tina Turner, who, by the way, Tina Turner, Auntie Enmity, Master Blaster, Mad Max, they all have like wrestler names, you know? They're all, because society is broken down and reinvents itself, they're all very like, people born in these conditions have very childlike like perspective in many ways. Like, so Auntie Enmity, she's like this badass black bitch dominatrix, you know, evil person that, you know, but here's the thing, as an entity herself, as an anomaly, she's just a product of the wasteland without any backstory. Essentially, she's there, and it just, you don't question it, and you just accept it like a little kid. That nostalgic quality of taking you back into it's just crazy. It's crazy because you're just like, yeah, this is kind of silly, this is kind of ridiculous, and yet I can see this happening, like things like this. And what's insinuated, I don't want to get into it, of the theory and everything, but it's not really important because your subconscious mind knows that people like this have, and will continue to exist. And this is, yeah, definitely a movie version of that. But you're like, okay, is this person really bad? Or I don't know, ethics it makes you think. And so then the fact that she in real life had just this personality, like this really fiery like energy, but it's also subtle and it's not really overplayed. It's just her presence in the movie is just it just kind of works, and I don't know how, and nobody knows how. And then the fact that she does the music in the movie, and the main opening credit intro, One of the Living, I've listened to that song One of the Living like probably literally 1,000 times in my life, probably like from beginning to end, maybe more. And it's not because it's just a great song. It's not just that it's a great song. It's that it reminds me of a sort of a invocation of a telling of the truth, and like an apocalypse. It's like basically it has this very like punky nihilistic spirit that maybe I'm just over interpreting it, but it gets me excited because it takes me back to like basically you're telling a story of where this is going to reveal the unintentional symbolic meta but fucking sanity of the reality of humanity, which is the sort of conditions that would create if we went from modern times and how spiritually diseased and unfair they are now. And all the policies and bureaucracies and bullshit in our culture just blows over the commercial lies that we tell ourselves to cope with the bullshit that our lives are as a consumer generation, dependent on these bullshit tyrannical bureaucracies posing as liberating for so long. What comes out of that is like what comes out of in the next generation, pure energy. And that's this sort of like nihilistic acceptance of crazy humanity. So I'm imagining my theory, as you know, I'm not a sociologist, but I study sociology a lot, of what that would look like is this huge like weird comfort in chaos, and widespread embrace of nihilism as a way of life, and not just something you're doing as a stage show. And so that hardened edge that I hear in that music, the soundtrack of this particular film, is the perfect juxtaposition for the film. It's like someone took so many crazy elements and somehow I'm able to get like a pseudo vision of actual similar conditions that might exist in similar post-apocalyptic circumstances. That's, I think, way ahead of its time. And I know that sounds buttfuck crazy, but I've also been in third world environments for years, and it mirrors other aspects of my life. It's this, combination of like universal truths in humanity, universal, like the universal heroic archetype story of making a condescension and saving the children, the less fortunate, as is exampled in this film. And basically a movie that exposes the horror of decay, but also the simultaneous regeneration of culture and ideas, that has a very punky, free-spirited energy about it. And that shows in the music, and as well as in a lot of just the spirit of the movie itself. I like the entity that is the movie, and it's definitely in Tina Turner. It's sort of in Max. He has more life in this movie, although he's always sort of like a Walking Dead, like depressive, tragic anti-hero character. So not the most life in that character, more so he was always supposed to be sort of like a symbol of death, I think, or a cautionary character who's not all that interesting really. But everyone else working together sort of gives the character a sort of humanity redemption arc in this movie somewhat. But at the same time, so it has this happiness mixed with this omnipresent darkness and sadness and bleakness that's symbolized from the visuals in the desert, the wasteland, um, and just the conditions of humanity, and comes full circle in the ending scenes, and just so much of it is like so timelessly human and innocent and hopeful, but juxtaposed with the reality of mortality and the long-term tragedy of human civilization, and then the spookiness of and the premonition of that into society now is just been compounded over time in my memories of seeing the parallels in my life. And so all of these things have created this as an enigma in my mind, like an anomaly of this movie. This movie haunts me in a good way, in a fun way, more than any film I've ever seen, that I find myself feeling more and more of applicable attachment to as I get older. But I'm not satisfied, because I think there should be more movies like this that are more fearlessly weird and layered with meaning, that just don't give a shit and just exist. Like the character Auntie Enmity is she's so fucking incredulous, hard to believe, incredible, that you can't really accept the character logically, but she's a product of movies, but yet it's so out there that you can't not either. Kind of like Star Wars or the Lord of the Rings or something. It's just like it becomes its own thing, and I love that. To me, that's an embodiment of fearlessness, as just the movie itself and all these little aspects that come together to make it that way. That has been probably the biggest inspiration for the projects I'm working on right now, and what I'm going for in future long-term YouTube related projects and writing and so many other things. But I want to definitely make it a collaborative effort with other artists and like-minded individuals. But yeah, I want to make a movie like this. That's one goal in my life. Or at least short films, or I don't know if it'll be a feature film, but you got to start somewhere. But working on I've already got a character that's been planned out for years, and all these ideas, and basically, but what it comes down to is just multiple. Like, it's not. I hope I didn't make it sound more complicated than it is, because I think all the necessary components exist in terms of potential for future movies to exist of this quality. It doesn't mean it. It's not reliant on any of the core components I was talking about. The common thread here of the main thing I want to see replicated and over and over again and flesh out more in new fashion. It could be benefited by a longer, more continuous, emotionally resonant narrative, with more character development, or it could just be raw exploitation energy with more devotion to original weirdness. There's other films that are like it in some ways, but as a perfect example of the type of movie, when I think about the type of movie that I would want to create, I want one that relies on the less is more qualities of this film, like more on subtlety, more on nuance, more on an artistic balance of so many different things coming together that just kind of work, even though it shouldn't work, and it doesn't make sense why it works. But the more you think about it, the more confused you get because it's just so damn original. So the key takeaway from all of this is originality. And how do you do that? How do you do that? Well, being hyper creative would help, and also being hyper competent and deliberately. I'm talking about films that are like deliberately eccentric, like this film. And I still don't understand exactly why a movie like this worked for anyone, why it makes sense. The movie should have bombed. It should have got rave reviews. It should have been mocked and laughed at to pieces like Joker 2 was. It should have been hated, but it should have people should have like paid more attention and realized, oh, this is not realistic. I can't get into this. This would never happen. Because so many moments in the movie, if you look at it logically, you're like, this is a movie. But somehow, all these little details come together to make you believe it because it's so much of a movie that it transports you. That's the escapist fantasy quality of it. So, the greatest cult movie I know, which I'm the biggest cult fan of, is Beyond Thunderdome. There's nothing that comes close to being a perfectly rounded movie that when I think of the type of movies I want to make, if I could make movies, if I will make movies, I don't know in the future. That's the gold standard that I would compare everything to. And being a trendsetter by being like deliberately fantasy with, I'd say, on the stylistic audiovisual front, a culmination of enough realistic details to get people immersed. Because you can't be with the style, it is still feeling like the first two films enough to have a very gritty, like real stunt work, a lot of real stunt work, that sort of thing, like presentation in the cinematics and everything. Like it's not overcooked, and so there's just enough realism. That's one of the secrets. Just enough realism as a foundation. It's like when you go see Marvel movies, for example. They're great, they're fun, but it's missing some impact that they'll never have because they make the classic American mistake of thinking more is better and more is not better. More, like Breaking Bad proved that, for example. Breaking Bad and shows like that Breaking Bad was a trendsetter because it understood that impact is better with more realism. So it worked more on realism and slow burn and the art of the acting and the delivery and the suspense and the build up and hysteria, like well coordinated, applicable, realistic hysteria where there's characters that are familiar and sympathetic, caught up in really bad, unfortunate, unlikely circumstances that's just compounded, and so there's more impact. And so there's enough of that realism that lets impact in this, and it's balance. So it is definitely, to make a movie like this, it has to be really well thought out and balanced, but mixed with taking stupid, fearless risks all the time but it have to come from someone who's already proved themselves, who's not trying to please anyone, who doesn't give a fuck about what anybody thinks. And that's what this movie does. It exists on its own as this weird, nonsensical adventure that is just so many things combined that there's no reason it should work, and yet somehow it does because it's so much of a movie. And I don't think it can be replicated because I think it's a masterpiece, in my opinion, for what it's worth. But this is the movie that I've had the biggest personal cult attachment to. There's like a symbol for so many other things. And when you watch if you've watched it for the first time, you might be like, "What the hell is this?" It's not that great. That's what I thought when I saw it for the first time. Just wait, give it 20 years. Just wait. It'll still be in your head, haunting you, and in a good way, and you'll know what I'm talking about. And then you watch it again and be like, "Okay, all right. I'm starting to dig this," and then it's like, I love this movie. You know what I mean? Anyway, fuck it. Oh yeah, Fury Road is amazing, and Furiosa is also amazing. I'll talk about those some other time, but Road Warrior and Beyond Thunderdome I like much better. I can't choose between those two. It's like choosing between the color red and the color blue. For me, it's that fundamental. and then the first Mad Max is like the color black, and so it's easier to be like, all right, blue and red are better colors than the color black, you know, and so that's the worst analogy ever, but fuck it, fuck you, shut up.